quick reminder, each episode could contain some game spoilers, so please listen or watch with discretion. And now, your hosts for The Gamer's Advocate, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Gamer's Advocate podcast, where we discuss many issues within gaming, games that we like to go over, or games we love, games we love to hate, games we hate to love. Today's topic is going to be about puzzles in video games in general. But before we do all that, we have a little game that we play on occasion. It's called That's Nice, where we try to bring up a game and then the other two have to talk about it for a little bit, but only in nice terms. So it's Banana's turn, I believe. What game do you have for us, Banana?
So I want to hear each of you say some nice words about Left 4 Dead 2.
So I think I can say something actually very nice about it, why I think it's an important game. Now, I'm going to clarify this by saying I have not properly played this. I think I did one mission back in the day, and I've done a few sort of clones of this game as well. So there was a Warhammer 1. I played Left 4 Dead 1 a few times as well. The thing that I really like about this game and that makes it stand out for me, and I think had an effect on other games around it, is the AI director. That feature in the game of having the game adapting to the players, how they're performing, as essentially this behind-the-scenes director is making the adventure better for the players. It's adding enemies, it's creating sequences, it's creating story within each individual playthrough, meaning that every individual playthrough essentially ends up being different to the previous, with what is a fairly small toolkit. You don't have thousands of maps, you don't have thousands of characters, I think you only have the 4. And you're always playing those 4 characters one way or another. But having that AI director who can make new pathways, I think they can actually remap the levels slightly by placing doors where they weren't before and things like that. They can make areas darker so they're a bit more horror-like. They can make them lighter so that they're a bit more open to the sort of seeing what's in front of you and maybe giving you more a shooting area. And you see that in other games. RimWorld, for example, which really is based upon having this storyteller behind the scenes, adapting the game to you as you play it. And I'm not sure that would necessarily exist without Left 4 Dead 2 and Left 4 Dead 1 and the AI director within those. So I would, as someone who hasn't really played it, I think I can see why it's important.
Sounds good. Ditto.
The laziest contribution that's nice we've had so far.
I to be fair, like, I don't really play a lot of co-op games at all. I mean, the most I've ever done is Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, but I think with these co-op games, the advantage of them, and this game in particular, is that it really paved the way for some of the more modern ones that you have now, and that have become much more popular. If I remember right, when I've seen the gameplay of it, even some of the other players, or not, I don't know if they're players or the enemies that are behind a wall, you get a silhouette there instead of just because a lot of times these environments are really dark and you can't really see anything, and it really makes it frustrating to kind of just play. And so having that little things like that make the gameplay work. So that way you have a little bit more control over your actions in the game. You kind of can plan ahead, or you can see what's going on. I think there's other modes other than just a 4-player co-op. I think there's a survivor mode, right? And
I think there is a 4v4 kind of, you can play as the infected, like the zombies, and try to interfere with the goals of the survivors.
And I think that's kind of really where I was going with that, because it's nice to see that they're adding more than just one gameplay style, because if it's not something you like, you may not ever touch the game again. But if they give you other options to play in another gameplay mode, it might be more to your cup of tea. So I don't know, if there's more of a challenge in a different style, maybe that's your cup of tea. Like I said, maybe something like that would be appealing to them. But like I said, I think because it's not, a very new game, I think some of the newer games that have come out taken high inspiration from games like that and have adopted things that have made it work well. And it kind of is a testament to it because it's still highly popular on Steam. So you know that the player base for it is passionate about it, love it. And I guess the graphics hold up because it's hard on a first-person game to always hold up. Sometimes the first person gets a little old, a little tedious. I prefer the orbital view more or less because then you can kind of see what's going on. But the first person, kind of like I'm thinking like Oblivion and stuff, you get to see it dated fairly quickly. And so for it to still be playing so much now, I think it just is a testament to itself more than anything else. But I mean, that's what I have on it.
Yeah, I think that mechanic of highlighting, and I think if I remember correctly, it highlights allies who are being kind of like detained or targeted by like the special infected. It highlights that so you know you can prioritize that, and it tells you exactly where you need to go. I do feel like that was something they nailed in the release of this game, and then kind of became adopted in other games where devs wanted you to focus on a specific point and wanted to showcase what was happening even if you didn't have line of sight to that.
Because like in Dead by Daylight, you have the people that are on the meat hooks or whatever. You can see where they're at based on the outline alone. Because I know when I'm even just looking at it, I'm not even playing the game. I couldn't see any of that.
Yeah, there's a aura reading in Dead by Daylight is a huge part of that game, and it does kind of adopt a lot of the same things that they used in Left 4 Dead.
This would be a question aimed at Banana, at being an actual fan of the game. Do you think it's a strength or a weakness that Left 4 Dead only has the 4 main characters? The fact that you're always going to be using these same 4.
So Left 4 Dead has 4, and Left 4 Dead 2 introduced 4 more.
Oh, is it 4 more on top?
Yes. So there's the Left 4 Dead 2 group of 4. But you can play as the Left 4 Dead. I believe in Left 4 Dead 2, you kind of go back and forth between the two groups, but it's kind of, they're grouped together. And then in Back 4 Blood, I don't know how many characters it is. It might still only be 8, but you can choose from those 8, and you just can't double up with co-op players. So you can't have 2 of the same character. I personally really like the Back 4 Blood version of it, to say you can choose which one of these characters, and they do have kind of unique talents, which was another kind of addition in Back 4 Blood that I liked. I feel like in Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2, it made a lot of sense because while those games are designed for you to just be able to load up anytime you want and just launch into whatever's going on, they do actually have a story. There's a progression. So you are controlling the Left 4 Dead survivors as they attempt to deal with the zombie apocalypse that's going on around them. And there's a progression through events that you can experience for those characters. So it made a lot of sense in those games to say, these are the 4 characters and this is their journey. In Back 4 Blood, the fact that you can swap characters in and out makes a little more sense because there's kind of like a home base and you're sending people out from that in order to kind of go through the story of that game. So it works, but I feel like I appreciated it more in the originals to say that this is a group of 4 people and this is their complete story. This is the experience specific to them. So I definitely, I think it helped the game in my eyes to say it made it a better story game, in my opinion, than being able to swap characters in and out, or maybe not even defining the characters that you're playing as. I feel like the fact that there are 4 people, they have their own personalities, and it's the same 4 in every level, worked really well in Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2.
Perfect. Yep, that was my curiosity. It reminded me, as you were describing it, of the Divinity Original Sin games, which you can play as created characters, or you can use from the archetype characters that they already have in place with their defined stories. And I think it's a better game when you play as those characters with their defined quests. in addition to the main quest line of the game. And it sounds a bit like you might have something similar, having these clearly defined characters with their relationships, their motivations, and always seeing these same people might in some way tie you in more to the universe and give you that attachment to them, rather than these blank, almost faceless avatars that you might otherwise have.
That's funny because I feel the exact opposite about that game.
Which one?
The Divine Divinity, or the
Divinity Original Sin.
Divinity Original Sin. Because for me, I came from the Baldur's Gate, the background stuff, and you could take a background character and whatever. I didn't want any of them. I wanted to make my own. So I've never liked taking my companion. Like even in the new Baldur's Gate 3, I don't play any of them. I do my own. But like I said, to each their own. I'm completely on the polar opposite of that. I don't like them.
Which is fine. You're allowed to.
I feel like the Divinity Original Sin kind of created characters are more Baldur's Gate if no companions existed. It's more Icewind Dale to say you created all of them. And I think that's what Kam is saying, is that Baldur's Gate is better than Icewind Dale because you recruit companions who are completed characters. They have their own story, they have their own thing going on. Whereas in Icewind Dale, everybody is a faceless avatar that you created for this story.
Yeah, and I would just go the one further as well, where ideally I also want my main protagonist to be one of these preformed characters. Maybe I can change their appearance a bit, but I want to have that main storyline that they would have. So I want my main character to be like a Jaheira, to be like a Khalid, to have their own defined story outside of the main narrative, as opposed to being an Oblivion character or a Skyrim character.
So something like the Origins in Dragon Age Origins.
Exactly that.
More like Kagan. Yeah, I think you'd be more like a Kagan. It's Baldur's Gate 1. Sorry.
What?
Sorry.
Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. It went way over my head.
An axe, he's the dwarf.
That's a character you can easily miss, too. So I feel like that was a deep cut. He's an angry little dwarf.
I met the first 5 people I met, and they stayed in my party until the end. Imoen, Khalid, Jaheira. I said no to the evil wizard, Minsk, and Dynahir. That was it. Never changed.
That's the canon party, even though it's
Is it
not
really?
canon. So yeah, that's the one that's in the books we've talked about. That's not the canon playthrough, but it's the only documented one.
They're the popular characters, so yes, you're not wrong.
Playing it correctly.
But again, those are the good characters. Like everybody in your party, with the exception of Jaheira, who's true neutral because she's a druid, and that's how D&D worked at the time. They're all good aligned characters.
Yeah.
I think in theory you're supposed to turn MON into the multi-class, the thief mage. Too.
Yeah, you're supposed to, dual
I didn't know how that worked. So.
Dual class. You don't want a multi-class.
Yeah, for humans, you couldn't multi-class on character creation, but you could dual class, which is to abandon your previous class in the sense that like you're no longer growing as that class. You're just switching to something else, which is inconvenient.
I believe I was told that because I play as a cleric, I should have done that with warrior cleric. I can't remember what the order would have been. I think I was told you should have started as a warrior and then became a cleric, or it might have been the other way around. But it seemed a bit over my head at the time, so I just played as a cleric and bulldozed my way through on story mode.
There's reasons so much for all those rule sets, but I think they had that right because you always play however you want. I mean, experiment, but you get your HP and you get your armor and all that other stuff going, so it's an easier grind, and then you get your spells later on, which,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Dead by Daylight, what were we talking about?
Left 4 Dead.
Well, it's funny because one of the first licensed characters in Dead by Daylight was Bill Overbeck from Left 4 Dead.
I thought you were going to say Jaheira for some reason.
No, they did D&D and they didn't bring any Baldur's Gate characters.
It wasn't Minsk.
Now it just feels like they're insulting us.
They got Vecna, right?
They got Vecna, and then I think an independent creation for the Survivor, which is an elf bard.
Well, that's my favorite kind of famous characters that I want imported into my Dead by Daylight.
That was
Unknown new builds.
Take
That
my
was-
money.
what frustrated me about it, because I think we've actually talked about this on the podcast before, but like I knew they were going to bring in Vecna. I didn't know who they were going to bring in as the survivor, and then they were like, "Here's, I think their name is Astri."
Pastry.
Pastry.
Yeah, Pastry without the P.
Oh, without the P. That sucks.
Yeah. So I think it's Astri, and I don't care. Like, there's nothing about that character that is appealing to me. They are an elf bard in a game where a bard isn't a thing.
Super.
Yeah.
The people have spoken.
So we're going to talk about puzzles, and we
The real
Moving
puzzle.
on from what I've done wrong.
we're going to ignore the fact that I clearly have made my own case, and I don't have to go any further on it. But
Mhm.
anyway, we're going to.
Very unconvincing case has already been presented.
Yeah. Well, it's.
Tell us another Thane story.
Well, the jury will decide, which I'm perfectly confident will be in my side. So, because they're logical. Today we're going to talk about puzzles. I thought, we all have some experience with different types of puzzle games, which is really interesting. Banana is probably got. I'm going out on a limb here, but he probably has more experience with overall more of them than we do. But I have the experience of going all the way back to like even they're not point and click, but they were just, directional mouse and keyboard, go west, go north, that type of stuff, which goes into the whole point and click, because then it's like you click on this to unlock that. It's basically find the clue basically, and then figure out the puzzle. I'm not 100% sure about your history with that, but you seem to know about every single game that we talk about. So I'm going to assume that you have a plethora
Except
of
for
knowledge
Left 4
about
Dead.
that.
I don't really know about all the games, but I just put together an adjective and a noun and I roll with it.
No. Specifically about the puzzle games, because we've talked about some of the puzzle games in the past. You seem like you already know what we're talking about.
So my experience with puzzle games is it's going to be a very light but widely spread experience. So my main experience with puzzle games was demo discs growing up. So on the back of PC Gamer magazine, wherever it might be. So you'll find that for a lot of the puzzlers that came around in the mid 90s, so we're going to be talking point and click puzzle adventures, things like Full Throttle, Sam & Max, Flight of the Amazon Queen, Teen Agent, Broken Sword. I'm going to have played probably the first hour or so of most of these games. And then for a handful of them, I will have gone on and actually picked up the main game. And some of them would have been really amazing, like Broken Sword. Some of them were trash, like the Orion Conspiracy. If you've ever played that, that is garbage. But I have this thin layer, so this widely spread thin layer of knowledge about classic puzzlers. Modern puzzlers, I know a few in depth. This would be games like Outer Wilds, games like, if we can call it that, What Remains of Edith Finch, and Firewatch. The Witness I have a small amount of experience with, but most of my knowledge will be based those 90s games, where I'll know a bit about a lot of them.
I've been playing puzzle games for years, so I feel like the genre of puzzle game is too vague, because I feel like there are games that everyone has played that I would consider in some way puzzle games, things like Resident Evil, God of War. Those games are not focused on the puzzles so much. So I don't think that would be like the primary descriptor for them. But you have to solve puzzles in Resident Evil. You have to solve puzzles in God of War. You cannot finish the game without solving those puzzles. Even in God of War, where it feels like you should be able to brute force your way through everything, you have to solve some puzzles.
I think that's going to be an interesting point, is where do we draw the line between games with puzzles and puzzle games? And you even have some games that you might consider puzzle games. Like, I think Uncharted, there are times when you could say, actually, this is a puzzle game, but if you don't get a puzzle within about 2 minutes, the protagonist starts telling you what the answer is. So at what point, actually, despite the effort going into them, is this really a puzzle game? And then you have, like you say, games like Resident Evil. And if I can throw it in, Final Fantasy VII. Navigating the Temple of the Ancients is a small little puzzle in the game itself, but there's no way that we could say the game is a puzzle
Yeah.
game.
I
So-
think it kind of comes down to a judgment call of what you think the intent of the game was.
Yeah.
If the intent of the game is to focus on the solution of puzzles or to use puzzles as the gameplay element that allows the player to navigate through a story, then it's a puzzle game. But if the focus of the game is an adventure in the sense of Resident Evil, it's very much a navigate this story. You're kind of a special forces character. It's not a puzzle game. It's a horror survival kind of game. God of War is an action RPG to a certain extent, or an action adventure game. I feel like when the focus of the game is clearly not the puzzles, they are kind of an obstacle to the gameplay.
Mhm.
Then I wouldn't call them a puzzle game. I would call them a game with puzzles.
I think the only one of them where I thought I'm not sure is the oldest Resident Evils. But even then, I think it's kind of it's a blurry line because there's a lot of puzzles in it. They can be quite hard. So that was the only one from what you said that gave me any doubt that it might be a puzzle game as opposed to a game with puzzles. God of War, clearly a game where the puzzles are just a little breathing space almost between the next god that you have to tear its head from its neck.
I think there's a really weird fine line on a puzzle lending immersion and also breaking immersion, because you have a game like God of War that may have a puzzle in it, and he's throwing his axe at this or that, and he's cutting the vines of, well, to what? Open up a door? I mean, who put those vines together? Something had to happen, and I guess, and clearly something happened, but they didn't happen in such a sequence of events that caused that door to be shut because of those things that you had to specifically. So it's like, yes, there's some immersion because we're in this situation. It adds more character to the environment. So you kind of becoming ingrained in that scene. But it also doesn't make sense if you think about the bigger picture of the puzzle. Other puzzles in some games, and again, it's not a puzzle game, it's just a game with puzzles in it, but I'm thinking like the original Baldur's Gate 2 had lots of little puzzles in it where you would have to go through, you had to find items and put them in a certain order. So they had all these like little things, but it kind of made sense because in order to unlock or get the next thing, you had to negotiate with the environment and find those things and then do it in the order that was requested in order for the action to happen. I think, like I said, there's kind of a fine line of creating a puzzle to kind of help your scene and one that just simply just breaks immersion at the same time, no matter how good of a puzzle it may be. But
I think the example of God of War is one of those situations where a game has fallen into a formula and they're so focused on the formula that they forgot to make it make sense. Because in the early God of War games, there are those puzzles that are orchestrated to prevent someone from reaching a specific location or to seal something away, and it made sense in world that there would be some kind of difficulty to removing this seal or opening this path. And then as the game progressed, I think they decided like, oh, God of War has to be this action game with puzzles in it. And then they forgot that the puzzles existed in a way that made sense in world. And now they just need to be in the game because that's what a God of War game is. And I feel like, from what I remember of the original God of War, like 1 and 2 that I played through, I never got the feeling that the puzzles didn't belong in the sense of in the game or in the world. But as you've described, kind of like the more recent God of War, it does seem like there are definitely puzzles where it's no, you have to solve the puzzle because we needed a puzzle. Like, okay.
Yeah, and the scenes are beautiful, and they totally make sense within the environment, but the puzzle doesn't make sense within the environment. But it's hard to criticize because the puzzles are really good. So.
Do you feel that puzzlers, puzzle games are a product of when their heyday was? So I think their heyday was probably largely in the 80s, 90s, maybe into the early 2000s. Do you think they're a product of their time in the sense that they were a way to combat limitations? We struggled to make, for example, advanced shooter games. They were just hard to make at the time with what we were working with. And a puzzler gave you a way to tell a story whilst having difficulty and challenge that wasn't just gunplay. It was a solution to that. And do you think that they, as a genre, are in decline? Already declined? Coming back? Do we think there's a future for puzzle games outside of just being a very niche corner of the industry?
I think, speaking mostly to the point and click adventure type of puzzle game, I think those were very much of their time. I think they were that step above text adventures to say, hey, we finally have the technology to put a graphical representation of what's going on in your choose your own adventure story. So this is the game we built. And I think we'll still see those, but they're kind of playing on nostalgia now. I don't think we are in the heyday of point and click adventures anymore. But I do think that there are modern games that have taken that, if you want to say, the soul of those point and click adventure puzzle games and gone in a different direction to make them more playable in the modern era. And I'm thinking of games like We Were Here, or I want to say The Room is another series of puzzle games along those lines, where it is very much puzzles are the focus and you're telling a story through puzzles, but the way it's presented to you is much more modern. It's much more technologically advanced to the point where it doesn't feel like a point and click adventure game anymore, despite being very similar in terms of what you're actually doing.
Yeah, I think the one genre that is holding to that concept, believe it or not, is the horror genre. It's nothing but puzzles. It's entirely puzzles. I often refer to Resident Evil as Spooky Mist. But Layers of Fear is a great example of and there's various endings to it based on what you do finish and what you don't finish, and how you finish it, I think, in some circumstances. But at the end of the day, it's a puzzle game. There's every room you go to, everything you see, there's going to be something you have to kind of put together in order to make that progress to the next thing. But yeah, I think the horror genre is probably the one. We're not talking about like the action ones like we were just discussing, Dead by Daylight and stuff, but the single person single person horror games, I think are probably holding on to the puzzle concepts.
Yeah, I think Silent Hill, to an extent, falls into that puzzle category. It's primarily a horror game, but it moves you through the game via puzzles.
Well, on the same note, I've been watching a friend play a lot of Mortuary Assistant at the moment, which has a very direct puzzle aspect to it. Fits perfectly into that genre. I think you're entirely right. Horror is almost holding on and keeping alive to some extent that puzzle aspect to games. And there was another, and I think you could call these horror, but they're not puzzlers, but I think of them almost as being pseudo puzzle games. Think of games like Until Dawn or the Dark Pictures games. I don't think they're generally puzzles that you're solving, but you're almost piecing together a puzzle step by step as you go through the game of all these small decisions that you're making that will ultimately then decide, do these characters survive? Do these characters not survive? Do your characters actually find out what the hell is going on? And even where you're not directly solving a puzzle, you're still putting together the pieces of this big puzzle, of this big tapestry in the background. There's essentially choosing what your ending is going to be. And I wonder if that's possibly where we still find some legacy of the old-fashioned puzzler games, is in those more cinematic titles. The others would be the David Cage series.
I think the Dark Pictures anthology games like that are kind of that final or most recent entry in what I think that progression of kind of that choose your own adventure starting point was. So historically, those choose your own adventure books are here's what you're presented with, make a decision, turn to this page and continue your story from there. And then point and click adventure games spawned out of that because it's the way you could tell a story to say, all right, you have to make these decisions now. How are you going to navigate this environment? These are the tools at your disposal. How are you going to piece them together to try and get out of this place? And I feel like that spirit is very much alive in the Dark Pictures games. It is definitely not the same game as a point and click adventure in any. I feel like to even make that comparison requires this level of depth to say that, yeah, this is the progression of a core ideology, and Dark Pictures has done it in a very different way, but it is very much a representation of, at its core, what I want to describe as a role-playing game. The idea that the decisions you make impact the game that you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think those lend a lot of cinematography and cinematics to a modern player who's not used to that wonky Resident Evil OG style. So they're telling maybe the same story, maybe even some of the same techniques, but it's bringing in a modern audience who is not wanting to go to those dated issues. So overall, the gameplay may be very similar. It's just being translated differently.
I do want to say that I feel like the Dark Pictures anthology, those games have kind of moved away from the gameplay element of puzzles to this kind of general storytelling mystery. So most of what you kind of experience in those games is storytelling and just responding to information. It's not so much solving a puzzle. It's not so much gameplay. I feel like those games are very, very close to being movies. And that's one of my frustrations with that specific series and that kind of genre of those games are mystery games at their core, but they're really more movies. Movies that give you a handful of choices to decide what type of movie you're watching or what exactly happens in that movie. It's very much an interactive kind of visual novel in that regard. And I feel like maybe if they leaned more on the gameplay mechanics of puzzle games, it might be more engaging for me.
That's interesting. So we feel then that they do embody almost the legacy of these games, but the way that they've evolved has actually possibly pushed them away from being a true inheritor of being a puzzle game, and rather they just almost carry the banner for them, but without really personifying what they were. Mm-hmm. So what do we feel then about modern, genuine puzzlers? Because I think that they still exist. They're just very different now than they used to be. And the 3 examples that I wrote down for iconic modern puzzle games, and they'll have varying degrees of relevance to older games, is The Outer Wilds, which I think is possibly the capstone of modern puzzle games. I don't think it's a story you could have told a long time ago, just based upon the sheer size of the story they try and tell, this mini simulated universe, and you trying to understand it in 20-minute runs through this. The Witness, which seems like the natural inheritor of the Mist and the... Is it called Riven or Raven?
Riven.
What? Riven.
Yeah, I was thinking it can't be Raven.
And then there's Uru.
The other one I thought of was Portal, which I can't believe we actually didn't mention earlier now that I think about it, which I think really gave hope in my mind that there was still a place for true puzzle games in their purest form in the modern day. Do you have anything else that stands out for you as modern puzzle games?
I keep referring to this game. Just there's a good reason. But Inscryption has puzzles. I try to tell people it looks like a card game, smells like a card game, sounds like a card game, but it is not a card game. It's not just a card game. It is so much more than what it appears to be. And one of them is a puzzle game. There's so many like little hidden puzzles all within that game. And not all of it is necessary, but a lot of it can help you get to where the story is trying to take you. So but the people that made that really know their stuff. I mean, they did Pony Island, and Pony Island 2 is coming out, and they're just exceptional at making a very intelligent puzzle game, not really be a traditional puzzle game. So
I think the biggest example that jumps out to me as a modern puzzle game is the Talos principle. I'm not sure if either of you have had the opportunity to play or to watch gameplay of that one, but that is very much a storytelling experience through puzzles. And I think that is kind of the direction that might be kind of the best inheritor of this kind of classic puzzle genre, as far as giving players a gameplay experience that's very much focused on puzzles that allows them to tell an interesting story.
And I think we can agree that the puzzling, the gameplay, the story, nothing feels anachronistic. It all feels intrinsically linked. Like they belong together. They were birthed together. That's a terrific example.
I mean, for when we talk about puzzles and like the old games and the new one, it's hard for me to separate some of these things because like we've brought up point and click adventures, and to me, like I always considered point and click to be pretty much synonymous with puzzle games, but there is a difference, but it's real hard for me to define that difference sometimes. Like I played Amazon, Syberia, you know. I refrain from using Myst as an example because Myst has changed so many times over the years that even now it's not really considered like a point and click anymore. It's basically it's pretty smooth, but back then it was just a slideshow with some video elements in it. Video games that like Com is referring to, I think they still the best examples that y'all are talking about still mesh some of those old games pretty seamlessly with the new, and I don't necessarily know if it's necessarily a graphical thing. I just think that they are just finding a different way of doing the same thing, but perhaps making it more seamless, because I can't really look at a game like Amazon or Syberia or even Sanitarium and say those were great games, but if I had seen them in a more modern one, I think they would probably be more in the vein of the games that y'all just mentioned.
When you try to define any kind of category, it gets a little tricky to really tell where that fine dividing line is. So for me, point and clicks were always kind of a subset of puzzle games to say, these are games that you're going to be solving puzzles. You might be doing other things. There might be little action sequences. There might be little kind of dialogue trees that give you more information. But overwhelmingly, you're going to be navigating the world with only your mouse, clicking where you want to go, clicking what you want to interact with, and then figuring out what you can do with the things you've gathered over the course of your adventure to reach the solution, which is a very vague way of defining a puzzle, because it kind of encompasses every game ever to say, this is what I have at my disposal. How do I get to my goal?
I mean, this is where you'll find that just labeling games and genres as a whole is so clumsy. If you think about the idea of point and clickers and you associate them with being puzzlers, the way that it just came to my head is not all puzzle games are point and click, but most point and click games are puzzle games. So you have that goes in that one direction. And I've always found this to be a way that I like to categorize games. I don't like to say a game is a puzzle game. I don't like to say a game is an adventure game, an action game, whatever it might be. Almost every game needs 2 or 3 of these qualifiers together
Mhm.
to narrow it down. Because if we say adventure, well, Broken Sword is an adventure. So is Elden Ring. That's about where the comparison ends. But if we then say point and click adventure, and we say Soulsborne action adventure, we've managed now to differentiate much more clearly between these. So I think we have to accept that the word puzzle here has a very, very broad usage, which is also what I wanted to ask was, and I think I leaned slightly towards yes, but quite heavily caveated. Do tactics games count as puzzle games? Is every turn in XCOM a little puzzle? Is every battle in Final Fantasy Tactics actually a puzzle waiting to be solved?
I think that's where you're trying to draw a line between puzzle and strategy.
Yeah.
In my mind, a puzzle is something that has a solution, one.
Mhm.
And a tactics game is a game where there might be the most effective strategy, but other strategies will work. And in some cases, the strategy of grinding to overpower your characters and then drop them into a fight they can't lose will work. That's not solving a puzzle.
Mhm.
that's that's just making sure that the puzzle can't stand in your way. So
Yeah, I
for
think I
me,
think
I don't
that's
think
perfect.
tactics is a puzzle game so much as it is puzzling. It's forcing you to think of ways that you could change your strategy and what might work most effectively.
Yeah, I think for myself, it would fall sort of under the very, very broad umbrella of almost being, like you say, puzzling. But as soon as you get really tight and you start defining much more narrowly what a puzzle game is, I think they wouldn't quite fit. Which is why, for me, it's got that soft yes, but there's a lot saying it's not a true puzzler.
Mhm. But yeah, I think this goes back to that the point we've all kind of gently brushed against, which is trying to define a term as far as a category that things belong to or don't is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And Legion's pointed out that my frustration with the way Soulsborne and Souls like and Souls light are used. None of those terms have been sufficiently defined in my mind to be used as much as they are. So I don't know what people mean when they say it's a Souls like. Is it Souls like in the combat? Is it Souls like in the fact that there's not really much guidance? It's just you're dropped into a world, you have a general goal, and you need to figure out how to get there from the starting point. Is it Souls like in the fact that it's tremendously difficult and it hates you? I don't know what that term means, but it's used so frequently that it feels like one of those things that everybody has some idea. Nobody agrees on what it is.
Well, I think that's only exacerbated then when you look at how young video gaming is. Think about film. Well, we've had film for a lot longer than we've had mass market video games. And think about in your mind the definition, distinction between thriller and horror. And you'll probably find that crossover between the two is really, really blurry. But there are some horror films that are definitely not thrillers. And there are some thrillers that are definitely not horrors. So you suddenly have the political thriller, the spy thriller, whatever it might be. And you just end up desperately searching for ways to narrow this down. And we have film now that's been around for well over 100 years. And then we have video gaming, such a young, evolving medium. I suppose it's unsurprising that a lot of the ways we try and describe it are as inelegant and unprecise as they are.
Yeah, I think that's it. The lack of precision when you're trying to pinpoint exactly what a game experience is like. It's you'll need thousands of words and we're going to try and sum it up in one category. That's
Yeah.
not going to work.
And then add to that just the idea that art as a whole is so incredibly hard to pin down.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's where some of my frustration with those terms comes from. It's we're trying to put things into a category that by their very nature blur the lines between categories. That's almost their whole point. Is they're, for whatever reason, maybe they're trying to appeal to a wider audience. Maybe the different categories don't suit the vision that the developers had. But for whatever reason, they bridge those gaps between categories, and people want to pigeonhole them into fitting a definition. It can't be done.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one way we could potentially try and narrow it down would be for me to ask you both, if I say to you puzzle game, what kind of game do you visualize first? Before you start getting overly complicated with it, do you see a point and click? Do you see that first person camera? Do you see Portal, for example? What kind of game do you see first?
It's going to be a game that I have to navigate to an endpoint. And I know that sounds very generic, but the first thing that pops in my head is a game like Alien Isolation. So it's not that there's puzzles in the games necessarily. There are to a degree. Like there's just codes and stuff you find. Those aren't the puzzles, but it's a spatial awareness puzzle. So you know where you're at in the big complex of the
Sevastopol.
Right, the Sevastopol. And you are in certain areas that you unlock that become traversable on the way back. And so now you have to know where you're at in relationship to other things. And it's this puzzle of it's almost like you're the mouse trying to get the cheese to the other end. So it's not that it's a game with puzzles in it, but the game is almost in itself a puzzle because you're just trying to navigate the maze. So that was the first thing that came in my head. So
yeah, which is really what I'm looking for. What does this word say to you? So you might then, and obviously if I'm wrong, tell me, you might see something like Resident Evil or Silent Hill as well as almost being defined very loosely into that genre.
Yeah, and that's why I said I think the horror genre really lends itself to it, because not only are you trying to avoid the horror of your situation and not get caught or whatever by the thing, but you also have this anxiety of the solution isn't immediately available. You have to kind of figure out what the solution is, and that is a puzzle, but it's under stress.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the direction that horror games are going, where you'll have those action sequences in horror games where you actually have to confront the thing that is terrorizing you. But the puzzle element it creates those moments where you're still worried about whatever that thing is that's always lurking in the shadows, always chasing you down. But you have to deal with an obstacle, and you have to think things through and come up with a solution with this threat that may or may not be in the room. You might actually be safe while you're solving this puzzle, but it's rarely ever established that you are. You're not explicitly told, like, don't worry, you can take as much time on this as you want. There's always that kind of looming threat that maybe you're not safe. Maybe if you take too long with this puzzle, you'll start to get overrun, and then it's even harder to solve the puzzle.
So
I feel like horror really, really utilizes that to great effect.
So it's just that permanent low-level tension that's always there. The game will never quite let you off that line.
Tetris does the same thing. I know Banana's a big, but there's a time, there's a certain element of stress associated with that. And I think that, not that you have to, clearly puzzles don't require stress in order to make it a good game. I'm not saying that, but it is that extra little element that makes it interesting, I guess. Because I can spend all day on a jigsaw puzzle, right? Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, but it's not going to be something that's I would think is entertaining every day, all day. Like games have that. The video games specifically have that ability to do that.
Well, you've just done something that we've got to be careful with, because this could be a big rabbit hole. You've just opened up as well the world of mobile gaming and puzzling. So when we think of a game like Tetris, you can go back and you can think into the 80s and the 90s of those very simple puzzle games that you would have. And I can't remember the name, but there was one with lots of bubbles. I remember that. You'd have to match like 4 in a line. Now, think of games like that. Think of games like Candy Crush. Think of games like Lemmings. We've missed this whole genre, which are the most purest of puzzles, really. Because I think we would think of it more from a PC gamer's perspective. But you have this entire world of puzzle games, which are literally like creating a puzzle for yourself, putting it down, trying to solve it by hand. So, do those games have a future? To me, the answer is very clearly yes, specifically in that world of mobile gaming.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree that mobile gaming is probably where you're going to get the purest form of a puzzle game, where it is just here's a puzzle, solve it, move on to the next puzzle. I feel like, and that's where I kind of lose interest because mobile games have that luxury of being very simplistic in what they can choose and still being successful to a certain degree. There's I have a puzzle game on my phone called Flow, and it is literally about connecting a collection of pairs of dots, and you have to find the solution that allows every dot or every pair to be connected by an unbroken line. It's a very satisfying, very relaxing group of puzzles, but it is just a collection of levels. And that's where mobile gaming loses it for me. So everything we've talked about as far as puzzle gaming on PC or console has been almost a means to the end of telling a story. I don't think you see that in mobile gaming. I think mobile games, because of the way that the mobile platform works, can just focus on the puzzle gameplay and be successful. And I don't think that works as well on PC.
I wonder to what extent that's a limitation of the platform, which I think was definitely true for a long time, and what is a recognition of the way that we probably play mobile games, where we probably are sat on the bus for 15 minutes. We don't have time for a cutscene. We want 15 minutes of gameplay. We're sat in the doctor's office waiting, and it's supposed to be 10 minutes. It might be an hour, but you don't want to start anything too long, just in case they call you in. So I wonder how much of that is defined and demanded by the platform and the way we play it, not so much the hardware, but just socially, the way that we expect to play these games.
Oh, I think that's absolutely a part of it. Because I have games on my phone that are not meant to be played in that quick burst kind of style. I have all the Final Fantasy games prior to 2003 on my phone.
Huh.
I rarely play them in that form because I have them on PC. I have them on console. Mobile platform is not the way I want to experience those games. I have Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 on my phone. I've beaten it on my phone. It's not the way I would want to experience those games.
Wow.
I would say that mobile games, by their nature, are designed more for that. You have a couple of minutes, you have a brief downtime.
You take a game like Angry Birds that seems to have a story there. Now it's just level after level, but there seems to always be like a rationale, a reason to, like, is the birds are different, or the combos are different in some way that unlocks a different character. And again, it's still just a level progression system, but in the background, it always seems like there's some kind of story going on. So I can see the association of a game like that and say why I want to go to the next level. It's not just a matter of like, I beat it, there's a certain little stylized image of what this world is.
I think that is almost the illusion of a story. I would kind of compare it to the early Mario games. Super Mario Brothers, there was a progression, but you're really just playing level after level. Your goal is to get to Bowser's castle and rescue the princess, but that's really the sum of the story. Is you're a dude, there's a princess, she's in trouble, go help her.
Yeah.
And that is how they give you motivation to progress through the levels. It's not really a story, it's just a goal. And I feel like that's more or less how Angry Birds works as a puzzle game, to say, we want to give you new puzzles. You have to progress through these levels to unlock something that gives you a new way of looking at these puzzles.
I think that's a great way to look at it, is that distinction between a goal and story. Where a story is going to give you, as well as the goal, is going to give you the who, the why, the when, the what, and really give you that extra foundation that's there to make a compelling narrative. Whereas, like you say, I think something like Angry Birds, it's more just, we are going to do this thing, but you will never really know why or what your character's motivation is, except for break that.
Yeah, you said the early Mario games, and then my first thought was like Donkey Kong, Jumpman. It's just level after level after level.
But yeah, I mean, that is exactly what I was talking about. It's, you have a goal, rescue Pauline.
Pauline, that's right.
That's it. That's the deep lore that you get in Jumpman Junior or whatever.
Jumpman the Carpenter. Wasn't a plumber. Lore.
Yeah, deep lore.
I mean, it's a thing, by the way, that we haven't approached throughout the podcast so far, and is directly to this subject. And it was going to be a two-parter. I was going to ask what your favorite puzzle game is, because we haven't done that. But also, what's your favorite puzzle in a game? A specific puzzle that you think back and think, oh yeah, that was some good stuff. Or that was infuriating. It could be anything like that. Is there something that stands out for you? Maybe the easiest way is to start with the game, and that might almost trigger the mind rolling in the right direction to find the puzzle that stands out for you. Do either of you have something that jumps to mind for your favorite puzzle game?
Puzzle game?
And again, this is your definition of puzzle. It doesn't have to be anything like Bejeweled. It could be whatever you think is a puzzle game.
I first was going to say Sanitarium, but it is an old one. It's called Amazon. I think I brought it up before. It was just really kind of neat, and it is one of those Myst-style games. Yeah, I don't know. There's just something about it that seemed... because it's called Amazon, not Amazon, but it has a lot of those jungle-type themes, but it's in a fantasy. It's the same guy who did make Syberia. So it has a lot of... it pulls in a lot of fantastical ideas. So when you're doing puzzles like that, it seems to kind of like mesh pretty well. As far as like a game or a puzzle that I remember, I always remember KOTOR and that vat where you're in Manan and you have to, I forget if it blows up the or basically overfills it. So that way the thing that's guarding where you're trying to go will leave you alone. And that one was interesting because you can't just put a certain amount of container in the other container. You have to like kind of go back and forth. And there's something very similar in Resident Evil. And Resident Evil has, is it 4, 5? I can't remember which one it is. But you're in a lab and you're having to mix chemicals together, and you're just trying to get it to a certain amount. But it's just basically math.
I want to say that was Resident Evil 2.
I've got 1 to kill the plant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it might be. Might be 1.
Okay.
That same puzzle was in Mass Effect to cut the Reaper support on
Similar.
Eros.
Right. But that one, all you had to do is flip some levers. You didn't have to like open things up and close things. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, but you were trying to set the power to a specific number, and you had to figure out what each lever added or subtracted. Yeah. And then kind of remember, because that was really the challenge of that one. It wasn't so much the math. It was, which one adds 7 and which one adds 5 or whatever it was. But yeah, I know that.
Right. But I think, like I said, that one puzzle got me because one, you're underwater and you got all these sharks that you're supposed to fend yourself off from. But you got that puzzle. And like I said, it wasn't just a matter of like, let me put X amount over here. You actually had to put X amount over here, drain that, and then put that one over here that was empty. And then that made it at 60%. And then you put that one over there and you filled this one up again and filled that one. Now you had 100. And it was just this whole thing that you couldn't do because you don't see it in front of you. It's all just gameplay. And it's, I don't know. I thought that was really clever the way they did it.
It's a good choice.
Mass Effect 1, Towers of Hanoi.
BioWare
That's not. That's not.
special.
That's also in KOTOR.
I guess for me, what I would say is probably my favorite puzzle game. It's taking some liberties, but It Takes Two. It's a co-op puzzle solving game. There's a mechanical skill element to solving all of the puzzles, but it really is here's your tools, figure out how to navigate the world with them. It's not so much practice these skills because you can pretty quickly master them. It's very much the thought process is your key to success. But as far as a specific puzzle that I would think of as my favorite, and it might just be because I feel like this is the only example I've seen in video gaming where it was done what I feel was the correct way. The series of riddles in Baldur's Gate 2. I'm going to try not to dig into the spoilers of the environment or what's going on. But there is a section in Baldur's Gate 2 where you have to answer a ton of riddles. It's a lot. And in every kind of situation where I've played a game and they introduce riddles, the riddles are either well-established familiar ones where I know the answer going in, or they're shitty. The reality is that people will try to create their own riddles and they forget that the rule is that a riddle has to have one and only one answer.
Yeah.
And they'll present you with a riddle and you can think of a dozen different ways to answer it, but only one of them is correct. That's a shitty riddle. That's not how riddles work. Baldur's Gate 2 presented you with a ton of riddles, and admittedly they took a little leeway in giving you multiple choice options. But there's really only one answer for all of them. And I think the fact that they just did it so well, and they're not familiar, they're not cliches. There are some. There are definitely some famous ones mixed in there. But there were ones that were unique. They were new to me when I played Baldur's Gate 2. I feel like that's my favorite, just because it was the only time I've ever seen somebody do it well.
It's very impressive. Riddles are incredibly hard to actually write. To make a good riddle, it's incredibly hard. And there's a reason we fall back on that standard lexicon of riddles that exist. And people don't tend to create riddles, they just tend to memorize them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, very much looking forward to that. For anyone unaware, maybe it's why Banana kept it vague. I am currently playing Baldur's Gate 2. And in a month, I've advanced about 4 hours. So in 2026, we'll come back and we'll see what I think about Act 2.
Yeah, Banana's over there flexing with It Takes Two, like, because he's got all the friends. So
yeah, look at him.
I have 2.
1, 2, me and come.
Yeah.
I was so close.
2 people I've never played that game with.
Yet.
Yeah.
I think then for myself, I've had the privilege of being able to wait for you guys to do yours first to reflect on mine. My favorite puzzle game, and I think it's the world's greatest escape room, is Outer Wilds. I have not been more impressed with a video game out of nowhere than I was with Outer Wilds. Almost every game I've played in the last few years that I've loved has been a game where either it was a remake, it was a sequel, it was some kind of brand I already knew. Almost every game I'm looking forward to, it's the same thing. It's rare that a game comes out of nowhere and really gets its claws into me now. Outer Wilds absolutely took my soul. It is an incredible game. I feel the universe in the game is a puzzle itself, and then within the game there are small individual puzzles that allow you to progress your overall knowledge of that grander puzzle that's taking place outside of you. So to me, it's the modern example of what a puzzle game can be. I was close to saying Portal, and I'm surprised that none of us, not unpleasantly surprised, I'm surprised that none of us just went with a point and click. That none of us said Broken Sword, Monkey Island, or anything like that.
King's Quest was up there for me, but
Oh.
I feel like that is the original King's Quest series doesn't hold up as well because of the limitations from when it was released. I still love those games, but I don't know that I could convince somebody to give them a chance now just because of how dated they are. There is a modernized version of King's Quest, and it reclaims a lot of that nostalgia. It's very well done. It's a lot of fun. I don't think I can call it my favorite or recommend it as highly because I know that nostalgia is a huge part of why I like it. But I will say there were definitely some honorable mentions. Hue, I don't know if you two have ever played that. It is a puzzle platformer.
Mm.
It is entirely surrounded or entirely focused on the idea of using color to navigate the world.
Right.
You're gonna love it, Com.
It's I hope you'll be able to play. I feel like there has to be a colorblind mode. If
I
not,
presume it's Hue, Hue, right?
correct. If not, it is one of the only videos on my YouTube. I
Oh,
think I have two. One of them is a complete playthrough of Hue. It also has a very, very lovely soundtrack, which is all you'll hear in my playthrough because I think it was recorded from when I was Twitch streaming via console. So there's no bells or whistles there. And I think I've just overridden my audio of interacting with chat with just the game soundtrack.
nice.
And the soundtrack is wonderful. But it was a beautiful game. It was a lot of fun. It was a challenging puzzler, and the puzzle platform I think is another genre that really works with puzzles. So Hue was definitely one of my honorable mentions. And then the other, I guess, more kind of category, since I did kind of go with It
Let
Takes
me just
Two,
quickly
is
dive in, by the way, for anyone who would have been curious. If you are colorblind, if you are wondering about the game Hue Bananas just mentioned, I've just checked. It has a full colorblind support. So if you do want to play that game, you can play that. Sorry, Banana.
oh no, that is, thank you. That is great to know, especially given like the goal of the game. It feels like it would have been a huge strike against them if they left that out. But the other category, and given that like it Takes Two was my actual pick, is this kind of modern category of co-op puzzle games. So
Mhm.
I've played a few of them. I've played We Were Here, which is wonderful. The first one is free on Steam for anybody who's interested in a co-op puzzle game. The whole purpose of the game is to improve communication. So you are two players who are separated from each other, and you're each presented with half of the information you need to solve the puzzle. So you have to relay what you can see to the other player and then work together to piece together the information you have to navigate through these puzzles. It's an excellent group. It's an excellent game. It spawned, I think, like 5 sequels. There are a ton of We Were Here games. But that co-op puzzle category, games like The Past Within, they're wonderful. I think those games really do an excellent job of modernizing the puzzle genre and giving you kind of a new way to experience it with the modern technology, the modern long distance multiplayer kind of gameplay that is possible now that was not possible in the early days of video games because multiplayer wasn't really a thing and online multiplayer certainly wasn't really a thing.
That feels
I'm a
like an
huge fan
interesting
of those.
that feels like an interesting development in video gaming culture as a whole. The fact that we now take it as so normal that you will play these video games at distance with people you've probably never met. We clearly are not all from the same place. We know each other, and it would be, I was going to say, just as easy for us to play a game together than for me to play with someone I live with. It's probably easier because most games don't have couch co-op. Now, thinking about that, I was just going to add on top two that stuck out for me for anyone who's looking for other puzzle games to co-op together. A Way Out, which came out around, I think, 2 years ago, which is the prison escape co-op game. and the classic co-op party game, which is keep talking and no one explodes. Which
No Way or A Way Out, sorry, is another incredible example. I feel like that is the slightly more serious version of It Takes Two, and literally just a series of stolen stories from movies. Every act within that game was a very recognizable tribute to a famous movie. But it was, even knowing that everything in it was derivative, it was so well done that I didn't care.
Well, it's the it's a horrible phrase, but it's the good artists copy, great artists steal.
Yeah.
Now, I just wanted to quickly throw in what my favorite puzzle was, which I didn't actually mention.
Right.
And it was from that genre, actually, more like Monkey Island, more like Broken Sword. And it's a puzzle in Broken Sword 1, and I think it almost defines the genre. You surely remember playing these games, Broken Sword, Monkey Island, picking up items and thinking, what the hell am I picking this up for? But at some point, everything has a use. At one point, in Broken Sword 1, you go to shake hands with a costumier, and this individual buzzes your hand with a little hand buzzer for no reason whatsoever, and he electrocutes your palm, and then he gives it to you, I think, as a way of apologizing. Later in the game, you're about to be gunned down brutally, and you decide that you're going to go out like a man, and you want to shake the hand of the man who's about to shoot you. That moment, when this ridiculous hand buzzer you picked up 5 hours ago suddenly becomes useful to save your life so that you can leap off this cliff to glory, sums up those games for me. And I just remember that puzzle so clearly that it has to be my favorite.
I think there's definitely a puzzle that fits that description for me. It's so memorable, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite. It's just, it stands out as very satisfying, very memorable. It's in King's Quest 6, I believe. You reach this new island, and there is a squad of, call them sentinels. They're patrolling the island to make sure that nobody shows up who doesn't belong. And each of them has one extremely dominant sense, and they are showcased visually. The one who is very, very good at seeing things has enormous eyes. The one who has very good hearing has enormous ears. But they each test you based on that sense. And so you have to figure out a way to disguise yourself one sense at a time based on what you have in your inventory. And it's so kind of simple, but also really satisfying to just do one rapid fire after the other and get through the entire sequence. And it's so iconic for me, so memorable, because each little sentinel has their little poem that they read, and this rhyming language where they introduce themselves, they challenge you to identify yourself, and then they pronounce to everybody that they're mistaken and it's actually this other thing.
I think I'll feel bad if I don't mention this, but MMOs tend to do this when you do group party mechanics, especially like the raids and stuff. And it may not seem like a puzzle game in itself, but if you haven't played an MMO lately, especially like anything that has raids now, like the normal stories and stuff, generally there's no puzzles there, but especially in games like WoW have incorporated a really, in my opinion, a really bad mechanic. It's just me in my point of view. You can enjoy the game, and if you like in-game stuff, that's fine. But they're doing a lot of things to unlock the gameplay to defeat a boss. I mean, you have, if you're on like a dance floor, you have to dance at a certain sequence, and then when that is over, then you can attack. And it's this whole coordinated thing, but you have to figure out what's going on in a group. And so it's not just you doing it, but it's a whole party mechanic thing. And kind of like the example I gave with the alien, where it's a spatial awareness thing. there's all these mechanics that are going on. Otherwise, if it doesn't happen, you can't defeat that boss. So there are, and I can actually give some very specific examples of actual puzzles in those type of things, but that's just the top that came to the top of my head that sounds like you can visualize what's going on. But there are games that I've played that have very specific puzzles that you have to coordinate with your other team members and say, this letter is coming up over here. You need to put this one over there. And you're in the middle of trying to fight enemies at the same time. So there are puzzles in those type games as well, but I definitely would not call those puzzle games. It's just that they're adding puzzle mechanics to a game that would otherwise, it's just you're just fighting a boss, So it is interesting that those, I think old school RuneScape does a lot of puzzles with a lot of the stuff that they do. I mean, it's almost puzzle centric, actually. It's, but anyway, yeah, I'd kind of be remiss if I didn't actually bring them up because I'm pretty sure somebody else would. So.
Yeah, I think just in my own experience, I'd say the MMO that I'm most familiar with is Destiny. I'm not a fan, but I'm very familiar with it. And they introduced a lot of things in their raids that are puzzles. They are group mechanics that you have to figure out in order to progress. I feel like some of them are done in a very stupid way. It's presenting you with very limited information and then forcing you to kind of figure out a puzzle with a timeline or time limit that will kill your entire party if you don't figure it out. I'm not a huge fan of that, but they do make the core gameplay a bit more fun, and they give you kind of a new challenge to kind of balance something you've done in every point in Destiny, which is fight kind of trash mobs, meaningless little enemies. But you have to do that while you're navigating these puzzles now. You have to add this additional challenge of carry this item up there. And maybe while you're carrying it, you can't fire your gun anymore. So you're relying on the rest of your team to keep you alive. It definitely made the gameplay more fun. That being said, there are some that are just genuinely stupid, and I still don't even know how the mechanic works. I just remember joining into a group and they were like, do this, do this. And I think that's not an indication of a failure in the puzzle as much as it is an indication in the failure of the direction that Destiny went, to the point where a lot of players started treating that game like a job, and they didn't care enough to tell you what was going on. They were just like, do your job. We have to get through this because I'm not enjoying what we're doing anymore. I'm just doing it to get a reward.
Yeah. Like I was playing Star Wars The Old Republic years ago, and I remember just this off the top of my head to be very specific. There would be a huge mech robot that would come out, and you had to put him under certain things to kind of overheat him, so that way he became kind of like weakened, like his armor was weakened so that you could just hit him. Now that sounds simple, but while that's going on, 50% of the party is in blue or something, and if they hit him, they're actually cooling him down, so they have to not do anything about him. Meanwhile, they're being attacked by mobs in the room, and then the ones that are, say, red have to be the ones who attack him, and then another couple of people have to be the ones who are doing the switches that are operating where he's going under the thing. And my point here is that that's a lot of moving parts. That's a puzzle. I don't like making that comparison to a puzzle, but that's what it is. And you can't get to the end point of where you want to go until you connect all those pieces and have that done a certain way. Yeah.
I think you've kind of showcased one of the reasons that I've lost respect for Destiny 2. Because you're talking about the idea of managing your party members. It's a single player game, but you have party members to manage. Destiny, you control one player. Your raid team is 6. I like co-op party or co-op puzzle games. I don't like 6-person puzzle games. Getting 2 people on the same page is relatively simple. Getting 6 people on the same page is not. And Destiny 2 has a lot of that core gameplay going on while you're trying to solve these puzzles. And the core gameplay it requires a decent amount of skill. I'm not saying I was ever tremendous at Destiny 2, but I will remember moments where we'll get somebody we didn't really know particularly well to join the raid group. And they hadn't really mastered the core mechanics, and they hadn't really familiarized themselves with the puzzle. So we're overcoming 2 obstacles simultaneously while trying to coordinate everybody. It just really, really ruined the experience because our goal was to finish. It wasn't to enjoy ourselves. And that's where Destiny went with their game. It's very much a goal-oriented game and not an enjoy yourself kind of game, which is why I've fallen away from it. But I do realize that additional level of complexity of managing 6 people as opposed to 1 or 2, that's where a lot of it started to fall apart for me. Is if you're going to turn this into a job, I don't want to be a manager.
Well, also, you can't really take the full credit of the victory either. I mean, you did your part. So,
right.
But whereas in a puzzle game,
and given the toxicity of Destiny's community, you will definitely have somebody who didn't do their part talking about how great they are.
Yeah. But like on a single player game or like a point and click or whatever, if you figured it out, you get all that, positivity on your side of things. So, yeah. Fundamentally different, those 2 things.
I was just doodling with my one hand, and subconsciously, I wasn't even thinking about what I was writing. I've just written why.
We don't have time to answer that question.
Well, now that we got calm doodling over there, I think it's probably time to call it.
Now that one of the
Can we not call it
has
that?
lost interest in the podcast.
and then there were 2. Yeah.
Calm daddies, calm doodle.
Well, if you enjoyed the podcast, we're on YouTube, but we are also on some audio formats as well. Amazon, Apple, can't always forget Apple, Spotify, and leave a review, leave a comment. And then, of course, on YouTube, leave us a comment here if there's anything that we missed, if there's any puzzle games that you preferred. Like, subscribe, hit the alert button to make sure that you get notifications when new videos come out. But we try to make sure that we get these out every Monday and Friday. So until next time, we'll check you guys later. Bye-bye.